K2, also known as Mount Godwin-Austen or Chhogori, is the second highest mountain in the world, after Mount Everest, at 8,611 meters above sea level. It is located on the China-Pakistan border between Baltistan, in the Gilgit-Baltistan region of northern Pakistan, and the Taxkorgan Tajik autonomous county of Xinjiang, China. K2 is the highest point of the Karakoram range and the highest point in both Pakistan and Xinjiang. K2 is known as the Savage Mountain due to the extreme difficulty of ascent. It has the second highest fatality rate among the 8,000ers, with around 300 successful summits and 80 fatalities. About one person dies on the mountain for every 4 who summit. It is more difficult and hazardous to reach the peak of K2 from the Chinese side, thus, it is usually climbed from the Pakistani side. Unlike Annapurna, the mountain with the highest fatality to summit rate, or the other 8,000ers, K2 has never been climbed during winter. Name. The name K2 is derived from the notation used by the Great Trigonometric Survey of British India. Thomas Montgomery made the first survey of the Karakoram from Mount Haramuck, some 210 kilometers to the south, and sketched the two most prominent peaks, labeling them K1 and K2. The policy of the Great Trigonometric Survey was to use local names for mountains wherever possible, and K1 was found to be known locally as Mashabrim. K2, however, appeared not to have acquired a local name, possibly due to its remoteness. The mountain is not visible from Askale, the last village to the south, or from the nearest habitation to the north, and is only fleetingly glimpsed from the end of the Baltoro Glacier, beyond which few local people would have ventured. The name Chhogori, derived from two Balti words, Chogo and Ri, has been suggested as a local name, but evidence for its widespread use is scant. It may have been a compound name invented by Western explorers as simply a bemused reply to the question, "What's that called?" Quote, "It does, however, form the basis for the name Ogea, by which Chinese authorities officially refer to the peak. Other local names have been suggested, including Lamba Pafar and Dap Sang, but are not widely used. Lacking a local name, the name Mount Godwin-Austen was suggested, in honor of Henry Godwin-Austen, an early explorer of the area, and while the name was rejected by the Royal Geographical Society, it was used on several maps, and continues to be used occasionally. The surveyors marked K2, therefore continues to be the name by which the mountain is commonly known. It is now also used in the Balti language, rendered as K2. The Italian climber Fosco Marini argued in his account of the ascent of Gasha Brimivi that while the name of K2 owes its origin to chance, its clipped, impersonal nature is highly appropriate for so remote and challenging a mountain. He concluded that it was just the bare bones of a name, all rock and ice and storm and abyss. It makes no attempt to sound human. It is atoms and stars. It has the nakedness of the world before the first man, or of the cindered planet after the last. André Weil named K3 surfaces in mathematics partly after the mountain K2. Geographical setting. K2 lies in the northwestern Karakoram range. It is located in the Baltistan region of Gilgit-Baltistan, Pakistan, and the Taxkorgan Tajik autonomous county of Xinjiang, China. The Tarim sedimentary basin borders the range on the north and the Lesser Himalayas on the south. Meltwaters from vast glaciers, such as those south and east of K2, feed agriculture in the valleys and contribute significantly to the regional freshwater supply. K2 is merely ranked 22nd by topographic prominence, a measure of a mountain's independent stature, because it is part of the same extended area of uplift as Mount Everest. in that it is possible to follow a path from K2 to Everest that goes no lower than 4,594 meters at Mustang Low. Many other peaks that are far lower than K2 are more independent in this sense. It is, however, the most prominent peak within the Karakoram range. K2 is notable for its local relief as well as its total height. It stands over 3,000 meters above much of the glacial valley bottoms at its base. It is a consistently steep pyramid, dropping quickly in almost all directions. The north side is the steepest. There it rises over 3,200 meters above the K2 glacier in only 3,000 meters of horizontal distance. In most directions, it achieves over 2,800 meters of vertical relief in less than 4,000 meters. A 1986 expedition led by George Wallerstein made an inaccurate measurement incorrectly showing that K2 was taller than Mount Everest, and therefore the tallest mountain in the world. A corrected measurement was made in 1987, but by that point the claim that K2 was the tallest mountain in the world had already made it into many news reports and reference works. Geology. The mountains of K2 and Broad Peak, and the area westward to the lower reaches of Sarpolago Glacier consist of metamorphic rocks, known as the K2 gneiss and part of the Karakoram metamorphic complex. The K2 gneiss consists of a mixture of orthogneiss and biotite-rich paragneiss. On the south and southeast face of K2, the orthogneiss consists of a mixture of a strongly foliated plagioclase hornblende gneiss and a biotite hornblende K-feldspar orthogneiss, which has been intruded by garnet mica-leucogranitic dikes. In places, the paragneisses include clinopyroxene hornblende-bearing samites, garnet diopside marbles, and biotite graphite phyllites. Near the memorial to the climbers who have died on K2, above base camp on the south spur, thin impure marbles with quartzites and micaschists, called the Gilgit Pusho sequence, are interbanded within the orthogneisses. On the west face of Broad Peak and south spur of K2, lamprifile dikes, which consist of clinopyroxene and biotite porphyritic vogosites and minettes, have intruded the K2 gneiss. The K2 gneiss is separated from the surrounding sedimentary and metasedimentary rocks of the surrounding Karakoram metamorphic complex by normal faults. For example, a fault separates the K2 gneiss of the east face of K2 from limestones and slates comprising nearby Skyang Kangri. 40-39 are ages of 115 to 120 million years ago obtained from and geochemical analyses of the K2 gneiss demonstrate that it is a metamorphosed older, Cretaceous, pre-collisional granite. The granitic precursor to the K2 gneiss originated as the result of the production of large bodies of magma by a northward dipping subduction zone, along what was the continental margin of Asia at the time and their intrusion as batholiths into its lower continental crust. During the initial collision of the Asia and Indian plates, this granitic batholith was buried to depths of about 20 kilometers or more, highly metamorphosed, highly deformed, and partially remelted during the Eocene period to form gneiss. Later, the K2 gneiss was then intruded by leucogranite dikes and finally exhumed and uplifted along major breakback thrust faults during post-Miocene time. The K2 gneiss was exposed as the entire K2 Broad Peak Gasherbrum range experienced rapid uplift with which erosion rates have been unable to keep pace. Climbing history. Early attempts. The mountain was first surveyed by a European survey team in 1856. Team member Thomas Montgomery designated the mountain K2, 4, being the second peak of the Karakoram range. The other peaks were originally named K1, K3, K4, and K5, but were eventually renamed Mashabrim, Gashabrim IV, Gashabrim II, and Gashabrim I, respectively. In 1892, Martin Conway led a British expedition that reached Concordia on the Baltoro Glacier. The first serious attempt to climb K2 was undertaken in 1902 by Oscar Eckenstein, Aleister Crowley, Jules Jacques Guillemot, Heinrich P. Fannl, Victor Wesley, and Guy Knowles via the Northeast Ridge. In the early 1900s, modern transportation did not exist. It took 14 days just to reach the foot of the mountain. After 5 serious and costly attempts, the team reached 6,525 meters, although considering the difficulty of the challenge, and the lack of modern climbing equipment or weatherproof fabrics, Crowley's statement that neither man nor beast was injured highlights the pioneering spirit and bravery of the attempt. The failures were also attributed to sickness, a combination of questionable physical training, personality conflicts, and poor weather conditions. Of 68 days spent on K2, only 8 provided clear weather. The next expedition to K2, in 1909, led by Prince Luigi Amadeo, Duke of the Abruzzi, reached an elevation of around 6,250 meters on the southeast spur, now known as the Abruzzi Spur. This would eventually become part of the standard route but was abandoned at the time due to its steepness and difficulty. After trying and failing to find a feasible alternative route on the west ridge of the Northeast Ridge, the Duke declared that K2 would never be climbed, and the team switched its attention to Chhogori, where the Duke came within 150 meters of the summit before being driven back by a storm. The next attempt on K2 was not made until 1938, when an American expedition led by Charles Houston made a reconnaissance of the mountain. They concluded that the Abruzzi Spur was the most practical route and reached a height of around 8,000 meters before turning back due to diminishing supplies and the threat of bad weather. The following year, an expedition led by Fritz Wiesner came within 200 meters of the summit but ended in disaster when Dudley Wolfe, Pasang Kikuli, Pasang Qatar, and Pinto disappeared high on the mountain. Charles Houston returned to K2 to lead the 1953 American expedition. The expedition failed due to a storm that pinned the team down for 10 days at 7,800 meters, during which time Art Gilgit became critically ill. A desperate retreat followed, during which Pete Schoening saved almost the entire team during a mass fall, and Gilgit was killed, either in an avalanche or in a deliberate attempt to avoid burdening his companions. Despite the failure and tragedy, the courage shown by the team has given the expedition iconic status in mountaineering history. Success and repeats. An Italian expedition finally succeeded in ascending to the summit of K2 via the Abruzzi Spur on the 31st of July 1954. The expedition was led by Ardito Desio, and the 2 climbers who reached the summit were Lino Lacedelli and Achille Compagnoni. The team included a Pakistani member, Colonel Muhammad Atta Ullah, who had been a part of the 1953 American expedition. Also on the expedition were Walter Bonatti and Pakistani Hunzaport Amir Mehdi, who both proved vital to the expedition's success in that they carried oxygen tanks to 8,100 meters for Lacedelli and Compagnoni. The ascent is controversial because Lacerdaeli and Compagnoni established the camp at a higher elevation than originally agreed with Mehdi and Bonatti. It being too dark to ascend and descend, Mehdi and Bonatti were forced to overnight without shelter above 8,000 meters, leaving the oxygen tanks behind as requested when they descended. Bonatti and Mehdi survived, but Mehdi was hospitalized for months and had to have his toes amputated because of frostbite. Efforts in the 1950s to suppress these facts to protect Lacerdaeli and Compagnoni's reputations as Italian national heroes were later brought to light. It was also revealed that the moving of the camp was deliberate, a move apparently made because Compagnoni feared being outshone by the younger Bonatti. Bonatti was given the blame for Mehdi's hospitalization. On the 9th of August 1977, 23 years after the Italian expedition, Ishiro Yoshizawa led the second successful ascent, with Ashraf Aman as the first native Pakistani climber. The Japanese expedition took the Abruzzi Spur and used more than 1,500 porters. The third ascent of K2 was in 1978 via a new route, the long and corniced northeast ridge. The top of the route traversed left across the east face to avoid a vertical headwall and joined the uppermost part of the Abruzzi route. This ascent was made by an American team, led by James Whitaker. The summit party was Louis Reichardt, Jim Wickwire, John Roscoli, and Rick Ridgway. Wickwire endured an overnight bivouac about 150 meters below the summit, one of the highest bivouacs in history. This ascent was emotional for the American team, as they saw themselves as completing a task that had been begun by the 1938 team 40 years earlier. Another notable Japanese ascent was that of the difficult North Ridge on the Chinese side of the peak in 1982. A team from the Mountaineering Association of Japan led by Isao Shinkai and Masatsugo Konishi put 3 members, Naoi Sakashita, Hiroshi Yoshino, and Yukihiro Yanagisawa on the summit on the 14th of August. However, Yanagisawa fell and died on the descent. 4 other members of the team achieved the summit the next day. The first climber to reach the summit of K2 twice was Czech climber Joseph Rakonkaj. Rakonkaj was a member of the 1983 Italian expedition led by Francesco Santon, which made the second successful ascent of the North Ridge. 3 years later, on the 5th of July 1986, he reached the summit via the Abruzzi Spur as a member of Agostino da Palenza's international expedition. The first woman to summit K2 was Pearl Wanda Rutkiewicz on the 23rd of June 1986. In 1986, 2 Polish expeditions climbed via 2 new routes, the Magic Line and the Polish Line. This second has not yet been repeated. In 2004, the Spanish climber Carlos Soria Fontan became the oldest person ever to summit K2, at the age of 65. The peak has now been climbed by almost all of its ridges. Although the summit of Everest is at a higher altitude, K2 is a much more difficult and dangerous climb, due in part to its more inclement weather and comparatively greater height from base to peak. The mountain is believed by many to be the world's most difficult and dangerous climb, hence its nickname, the Savage Mountain. It, and the surrounding peaks, have claimed more lives than any others. As of July 2010, only 302 people have completed the ascent, compared with over 2,700 who have ascended Everest. At least 80 people have died attempting the climb. 13 climbers from several expeditions died in the 1986 K2 disaster. Another 6 mountaineers died on 13 August 1995, while 11 climbers died in the 2008 K2 disaster. On 1 August 2008, a group of climbers went missing after a large piece of ice fell during an avalanche, taking out the fixed ropes on part of the route. 4 climbers were rescued, but 11, including Gerard McDonnell, the first Irish person to reach the summit, were confirmed dead. Despite several attempts, nobody reached the summit. On 6 August 2010, Fredrik Eriksson, who were intended to ski from the summit, joined Gerlind Kaltenbrunner on the way to the summit of K2. Eriksson fell 1,000 meters and was killed. Kaltenbrunner aborted her summit attempt. Despite several attempts, nobody reached the summit. On 23 August 2011, a team of 4 climbers reached the summit of K2 from the north side. Gerlind Kaltenbrunner became the first woman to complete all 14 8,000ers without supplemental oxygen. Kazakhs Maksut Jumayev and Vasily Putsov completed their 8,000ers quest. The 4th team member was Dariusz Zaluski from Poland. The year started with the Russian team aiming for a first winter ascent. The expedition ended with the death of Vitaly Gorlik due to frostbite and pneumonia. The Russian team cancelled the ascent. In the summer season, K2 saw a record crowd standing on its summit, 28 climbers in a single day, bringing the total for the year to 30. On 28 July 2013, 2 New Zealanders, Marty Schmidt and his son Denali, died after an avalanche destroyed the camp. A guide had reached the camp they were at, but said they were nowhere to be seen, and the campsite tent showed signs of having been hit by an avalanche. British climber Adrian Hayes, who was with the group, later posted on his Facebook page that the campsite had been wiped out. On 26 July 2014, the first team of Pakistani climbers scaled K2. There are 6 Pakistani and 3 Italian climbers in the expedition, called K2 60 years later, according to BBC. Previously, K2 had only been summited by individual Pakistanis as part of international expeditions. On 27 July 2014, Garrett Madison led a team of 3 American climbers and 6 Sherpas to summit K2. Climbing routes and difficulties. There are a number of routes on K2, of somewhat different character, but they all share some key difficulties. First is the extreme high altitude and resulting lack of oxygen. There is only 1/3 as much oxygen available to a climber on the summit of K2 as there is at sea level. Second is the propensity of the mountain to experience extreme storms of several days' duration, which have resulted in many of the deaths on the peak. Third is the steep, exposed, and committing nature of all routes on the mountain, which makes retreat more difficult, especially during a storm. Despite many attempts, there have been no successful winter ascents. All major climbing routes lie on the Pakistani side, which is also where base camp is located. Abruzzi Spur. The standard route of ascent, used far more than any other route, is the Abruzzi Spur, located on the Pakistani side. First attempted by Prince Luigi Amadeo, Duke of the Abruzzi in 1909. This is the southeast ridge of the peak, rising above the Godwin-Austen Glacier. The spur proper begins at an altitude of 5,400 meters, where advanced base camp is usually placed. The route follows an alternating series of rock ribs, snow, ice fields, and some technical rock climbing on 2 famous features: House's Chimney and the Black Pyramid. Above the Black Pyramid, dangerously exposed and difficult to navigate slopes lead to the easily visible shoulder, and thence to the summit. The last major obstacle is a narrow couloir known as the bottleneck. which places climbers dangerously close to a wall of seracs which form an ice cliff to the east of the summit. It was partly due to the collapse of one of these seracs around 2001 that no climbers summited the peak in 2002 and 2003. On the 1st of August 2008, 11 climbers from several expeditions died during a series of accidents, including several ice falls in the bottleneck. North Ridge. Almost opposite from the Abruzzi spur is the North Ridge, which ascends the Chinese side of the peak. It is rarely climbed, partly due to very difficult access involving crossing the Chhogori River, which is a hazardous undertaking. In contrast to the crowds of climbers and trekkers at the Abruzzi base camp, usually at most 2 teams are encamped below the North Ridge. This route, more technically difficult than the Abruzzi, ascends a long, steep, primarily rock ridge to high on the mountain. Camp 4, the Eagle's Nest, at 7,900 meters, and then crosses a dangerously slide-prone hanging glacier by a leftward climbing traverse, to reach a snow couloir which accesses the summit. Besides the original Japanese ascent, a notable ascent of the North Ridge was the one in 1990 by Greg Child, Greg Mortimer, and Steve Svensson, which was done alpine-style above Camp 2, though using some fixed ropes already put in place by a Japanese team. Other routes, because 75% of people who climb K2 use the Abruzzi spur, these listed routes are rarely climbed. No one has climbed the east face of the mountain, due to the instability of the snow and ice formations on that side. Northeast Ridge, long and corniced, finishes on uppermost part of Abruzzi route, first climbed by a 4-man American team in September 1978. West Ridge, first climbed in 1981. This route starts on the distant Negrotto Glacier and it goes through unpredictable bands of rock and snowfields. Southwest Pillar or Magic Line, very technical, and second most demanding. First climbed in 1986 by the Polish-Slovak trio Piasecki Wroz Bozic. Since then Jordi Coromines from Spain was the only successful climber on this route, despite many other attempts. South Face or Polish Line, or Central Rib, extremely exposed, most demanding and most dangerous. In July 1986, Jerzy Kukuczka and Tadeusz Piotrowski summited on this route. Piotrowski was killed while descending. The route starts off the first part of the southwest pillar, and then deviates into a totally exposed, snow-covered cliff area, then through a gully known as the Hockey Stick, and then goes up to yet another exposed cliff face, and the route continues through yet another extremely exposed section all the way up to the point where the route joins with the Abruzzi spur about 1,000 feet before the summit. Reinhold Messner called it a suicidal route, and so far, no one has repeated Kukuczka and Piotrowski's achievement. The route is so avalanche-prone that no one else has ever considered a new attempt. Northwest Face. First ascent via this route was in 1990 via a Japanese team. This route is located on the Chinese side of the mountain. This route is known for its chaotic rock and snowfields all the way up to the summit. Northwest Ridge finishes on North Ridge. First ascent in 1991. South-southeast spur or Sesand route finishes on Abruzzi route, possibly safer alternative to the Abruzzi spur, because it avoids Black Pyramid, the first big obstacle on Abruzzi. First done by a Spanish Basque team in 1994. West Face. Technical difficulty at high altitude. First climbed by Russian team in 2007. This route is almost entirely made up of rock crevasses and snow-covered couloirs. Use of supplemental oxygen. For most of its climbing history, K2 was not usually climbed with supplemental oxygen, and small, relatively lightweight teams were the norm. However, the 2004 season saw a great increase in the use of oxygen. 28 of 47 summiteers used oxygen in that year. Acclimatization is essential when climbing without oxygen to avoid some degree of altitude sickness. K2's summit is well above the altitude at which high-altitude pulmonary edema or high-altitude cerebral edema can occur. In mountaineering, when ascending above an altitude of 8,000 meters, the climber enters what is known as the death zone. Films: K2, Vertical Limit, K2, Siren of the Himalayas, The Summit, Disasters, 1986 K2 Disaster, 1995 K2 Disaster, 2008 K2 Disaster. Bibliography: Booth Martin, A Magic Life, a biography of Aleister Crowley, London, Hodder and Stoughton. ISBN 0340718064. Curran, Jim. K2, The Story of the Savage Mountain. Hodder and Amp, Stoughton. ISBN 9780340660072. MacDonald, Bernadette. Brotherhood of the Rope, The Biography of Charles Houston. The Mountaineers Books. ISBN 9780898869422.